Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and we are back with more Eats, Shoots, and Leaves. Today we'll be reading more of the introduction. Hopefully, we can finish it. Might extend this episode and see if we can get that done, but we'll see. We'll see. Anyway, with that said, let's go ahead and just jump into this, shall we? Every language expert from Dr. Johnson onwards has accepted that it's a mistake to attempt to embalm the language. Of course, it must change and adapt. When the time comes that Pip's original text is equally readable with the one above, then our punctuation system can be declared dead and no one will mind. In the chapters that follow, we will see how it is in the nature of printers' conventions, which is all punctuation marks are, to develop over time, usually in the cause of making language less fussy on the page. It is useful to remember, however, as we struggle to preserve a system under attack, that a reader from a couple of hundred years ago would be shocked by present day punctuation that we now regard as flawless and elegant. Why don't we use capital letters for all nouns anymore? Why don't we use full stops after everyday abbreviations? Why not combine colons with dashes sometimes? Where did all the commas go? Why isn't there a hyphen in today? Lawks a mussy. What sort of punctuation chickens are we at the beginning of the 21st century? Well, taking just the initial capital letters and the terminating full stop, the rest will come later. They have not always been there. The initial letter of a sentence was first capitalized in the 13th century, but the rule was not consistently applied until the 16th. In the manuscripts of the 4th to 7th centuries, the first letter of the page was decorated, regardless of whether it was the start of a sentence. And indeed, while there are on the subject of decorated letters, who can forget the scene in Not the 9 o'clock News, in which an elderly, exhausted monk unbent himself after years of illuminating on first page of the Bible, only to see that he had written gloriously Benesis. Nowadays, the convention for starting a new sentence with a capital letter is so ingrained that word processing software will not allow you to type a full stop and then a lowercase letter. It will capitalize automatically. This is bad news, obviously, for chaps like E. E. Cummings, but good news for those who have spotted the inexorable advance of lowercase into book titles, television captions, company names, and, of course, everything on the non-case sensitive internet, and lie awake at night worrying about the confusion this is spreading in young minds. Meanwhile, the full stop is surely the simplest mark to understand, so long as everyone continues to have some idea what a sentence is, which is a condition that can't be guaranteed. As the original point, so called by Chaucer, it appears to occupy a place in our grammar that is unassailable. Every time the sentence ends, there is a full stop or a full stop substitute, such as an exclamation mark or a question mark. As easy as that. If you resort to full stops all the time, by the way, and don't use anything else and keep to very short sentences, people who have read H.W. Fowler's The King's English in 1906 will accuse you of spot plague and perhaps also assume you are modeling yourself on Ernest Hemingway. But the good news is you can't go wrong grammatically. The American name period, incidentally, was one of the original English names too. Just as the word comma originally referred to the piece of writing itself rather than the mark that contained it, so period referred to a longer piece of writing. Shakespeare called the full stop a period in A Midsummer Night's Dream, when he described nervous players making periods in the midst of sentences. This was the occasion of one of the first and unfunniest scenes of someone wrecking the sense of a speech by putting full stops in the wrong place. We do not come as minding to content you. Our true intent is, all for your delight we are not here. William Shakespeare, A Midsummer Night's Dream, Act 5, Scene 1. Ho-hum, but we should not be complacent even on behalf of the robust and ambiguous full stop. Young people call them dots, you know. They are now accustomed to following a full stop with a lowercase letter and no space. Ask them to write 7:30 in figures, 7.30, and they will probably either put a colon in it because their American software uses a colon for 7:30, or write 7-30 or 7'30. Meanwhile, the illiterate default punctuation mark is nowadays the comma, which gives even more cause for alarm. The tap water is safe to drink in tea and coffee. However, we recommend using bottled water for drinking. It can be purchased very cheaply in the nearby shops. 60 years ago, when he wrote Mind the Stop, G.V. Carey gave just one paragraph to the apostrophe because there was so little to say about it. If only all marks were so easy, he sighed. But this was in an age when people had been taught the difference between am I looking at my dinner or the dogs, and am I looking at the dinner or the dogs? What I hope will become clear from this book is that one can usefully combine a descriptive and prescriptive approach to what is happening to the single aspect of the language. The descriptive sort of linguist tends to observe change in the language, note it, analyze it, and observe change, and manage not to wake up screaming every night. He will opine that if, say, the apostrophe is turning up in words such as books, then that's a sure sign nobody knows how to use it anymore, and it has outlasted its usefulness. It is like Tinkerbell with her little light fading, sustained only by elicited applause. It will ultimately fade, extinguish, and die. This is highly sane and healthy point of view, of course, if a little emotionally cool. Meanwhile, at the end of the spectrum, severely prescriptive grammarians would argue that since they were taught at school in 1943 that you must never start a sentence with and or but, The modern world is benign by ignorance and folly, and most of the modern literature should be burned. Somewhere between those positions is where I want us to end up. Staunch because we understand the advantages of being staunch. Flexible because we understand the rational and historical necessity to be flexible. In Mind the Stop, Carey defines punctuation as being governed 2/3 by rule and 1/3 by personal taste. My own position is simple. In some matters of punctuation, there are simple rights and wrongs. In others, one must apply good ear to good sense. I want the greatest clarity from punctuation, which means supremely that I want apostrophes where they should be, and I will not cease from mental fight, nor shall my sword sleep in my hand. Hang on, didn't Jerusalem begin with and? Until everyone knows the difference between its and its. And bloody well, nobody writes about dead sons' photos without indicating whether the photos in question show one son or several. There is a rumor that in parts of the civil service, workers have been pragmatically instructed to omit apostrophes because no one knows how to use them anymore. And this is the kind of pragmatism, I say along with Winston Churchill, up with which we shall not put. How dare anyone make this decision on behalf of the apostrophe? What gives the civil service, or indeed Warner Brothers, the right to decide our Tinker Bell should die? How long will it be before a mainstream publisher allows an illiterate title into print? How long before the last few punctuation sticklers are obliged to take refuge together in caves? So what I propose is action. Sticklers unite. You have nothing to lose but your sense of proportion, and arguably you didn't have a lot of that to begin with. Maybe we won't change the world, but at least we'll feel better. The important thing is to unleash your inner stickler, while at the same time not getting punched in the nose or arrested for damage to private property. You know the campaign called Pipe Down against the use of pipe music? Well, ours will be Pipe Up. Be a nuisance. Do something. And if possible, use a bright red pen. Send black emails that are badly punctuated. Return letters. Or send back emails that are badly punctuated. Return letters. Picket Herods. Who cares if members of your family abhor your inner stickler and devoutly wish you had an inner Scooby-Doo instead? At least if you adopt a zero-tolerance approach, when you see a banner advertising CDs, DVDs, videos, and books, you won't just stay indoors getting depressed about it. Instead, you will engage in some direct action argy-bargy. Because, here's the important thing, you won't be alone. There's always been the problem for sticklers, you see. The feeling of isolation, the feeling of nerdishness. One solitary obsessive, feebly armed with an apostrophe on a stick, will never have the nerve to demonstrate outside Warner Brothers on the issue of 2 weeks' notice. But if enough people could put together in a common cause, who knows what we might accomplish? There are many obstacles to overcome here, not least our national characteristics of reserve. It's impolite to tell someone they're wrong. Apathy, someone else will do it. And outright cowardice. Is it worth being duffed up for the sake of a terminally ailing printer's convention? But I have faith. I do have faith. And I also have an inner stickler that, having been unleashed, is now roaring, salivating, and clawing the air in a quite alarming manner. There is just one final thing holding us back then. It is that every man is his own stickler, and while I am very much in favor of forming an army of well-informed punctuation vigilantes, I can foresee problems getting everyone to pull up in the same direction. There will be those, for example, who insist that the Oxford comma is an abomination, the second comma in ham, eggs, and chips, whereas others are unmoved by the Oxford comma, but incensed by the trend towards under-hyphenation, which the Oxford comma people have quite possibly never even noticed. Yes, as Evelyn Waugh wrote, everyone has always regarded any usage but his own as either barbarous or pedantic. Or, as Kingsley Amis has put it less delicately in his book, The King's English, in 1997, the world of grammar is divided into Burkes and Wankers. Burkes being those who are outrageously slipshod about language, and Wankers those who are, in our view, abhorrently over-precise. Left to the Burkes, the English language would die of impurity, like late Latin. Left to Wankers, it would die instead of purity, like medieval Latin. Of course, the drawback is implicit. When you, by nature, subscribe to the view that everyone except yourself is a Burke or a Wanker, it is hard to bond with anybody in any rational common cause. You think those sluggish chaps in the movie heist gangs fall out a bit too quickly and mindlessly? Well, sticklers are worse. The Czech novelist Milan Kundera once fired a publisher who insisted on replacing a semicolon with a full stop. Meanwhile, full-time editors working together in the same publication using the same style book will put hyphens in, take them out, and put them in again, all day, if necessary. The marginal direction to printers, stet, meaning let it stand, and canceling an alteration, gets used rather a lot in these conditions. At The Listener, where I was a literary editor from 1986 to 1990, I discovered that any efforts I made to streamline the prose on my pages would always be challenged by one particular sub-editor who would proofread my book reviews and archly insert literally dozens of little commas, each one of which I felt was a dart in my flesh. Of course, I never revealed the annoyance she caused. I would thank her, glance at the blizzard of marks on my galley proof, wait for her to leave the room, and then, standing up to get the better run at it, attack the proof, feverishly crossing out everything she had added and writing stet, 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 all down the page until my arm got tired and I was spent. And don't forget, this comma contention was not a matter of right or wrong, it was just a matter of taste. Eats, Shoots, and Leaves is not a book about grammar. I am not a grammarian. To me, a subordinate clause will forever be, since I heard the actor Martin Jarvis describe it thus, one of Santa's little helpers. A degree in English language is not a prerequisite for caring about where a bracket is preferred to a dash, or a comma needs to be replaced by a semicolon. If I did not believe that everyone is capable of understanding where an apostrophe goes, I would not be writing this book. Even as a book about punctuation, it will not give all the answers. There are already umpteen excellent punctuation guides on the market. There is even a rather delightful publication for children called the Punctuation Repair Kit, which takes the line, "Hey, it's uncool to be stupid," which is a lie, of course, but you have to admire them for trying. The trouble with all these grammar books is that they are read principally by keen foreigners. Meanwhile, native English speakers who require their help are the last people who will make the effort to buy and read them. I am reminded of a scene in Woody Allen's Small Time Crooks when an oily Hugh Grant offers to help ignoramuses Alan and Tracy Ullman, newly wealthy, with any sort of cultural education. It is anything you want to, or is there anything you want to know? He asks Alan, who has been sullen throughout the interview. And Alan says reluctantly, "Well, I would like to learn how to spell Connecticut." What a great line that is. I would like to learn how to spell Connecticut. If you similarly always wanted to know how to use an apostrophe, it means you never will, doesn't it? If only because it's so extremely easy to find out. So if this book doesn't instruct about punctuation, what does it do? Well, you know those self-help books that give you permission to love yourself? This one gives you permission to love punctuation. It's about how we got the punctuation we have today, how such a tiny bit adaptable how a tiny but adaptable system of marks allows us to notate most, but not all, types of verbal expression, and how, according to Beachcomber, a greengrocer in days of yore inspired good Queen Bess to create the post of apostropher royal. But mainly, it's about making sticklers feel good about their seventh sensibility to see dead punctuation, whisper it in the verge of tears tones, "It doesn't know it's dead," and to defend their sense of humor. I have two cartoons I treasure. The first shows a row of 10 Roman officers, one of them prone on the ground, with a cheerful caption from a survivor of the coal, "Hey, this decimation isn't as bad as they say it is." The second shows a bunch of vague, stupid-looking people standing outside a building, and behind them is a big sign that says, "Illiterates Entrance." And do you want to know the awful truth? The original drawing, it said, illiterates entrance. So I changed it. Printed correction fluid over the wrong apostrophe, inserted the right one. Yes, some of us were born to be punctuation vigilantes. But that ends the introduction. So in the next episode, we'll be getting into the actual context of the book. But let's look at some of the mentions here that probably could use some explaining. Anyway. Genesis. Yeah, if you've ever seen the handwritten Bibles of pre-print era, the first letter on the first page, there's such decoration around it, which she mentions. But yeah, you really have to go back and look at the pre-print way books were written, way they were copied. Because before that point, monks would take their time and copy it bit by bit. So instead of doing the G, he ended up making a B. Innosus. There. She mentions bad news for people like E. E. Cummings, or letters and then a period, or after a period, are often capitalized. Sorry, I was about to say punctualized. Capitalized. E. Cummings. Usually those, if you write his names in small letters, you're never going to be able to manage this, because you might write the first one in small letters, but then it'll be dot capital E dot capital C. And it makes no sense, because a lot of the times his name is written in lowercase. Yeah. Spot plague with the example of too many periods. The horse ran away, period. I cried, period. Instead of, I walked back to the house, period. You could have made that, when the horse ran away, I cried and turned to walk back to the house, period. Insert a few commas. Yeah. That's what they're talking about, spot plague, or modeling themselves on Ernest Hemingway, who often wrote in the short sentences. So, yeah. Shakespeare. Let's see. What else do we have? Pipe up, pipe down, pipe up. Say things. Yeah, she mentions and if possible, use bright red pens. Back in my day, teachers often looked at your papers and would use a red pen to mark down what you got wrong, fill in stuff, send back emails with bad that are badly punctuated. That's just funny. That's pretty self-explanatory. And then return letters, same as emails, And then Pickett Harrods. Harrods is a department store. Its name on the front is spelled Harrods. But the name of the people it's named after is Herod. Harrod. So there should be an apostrophe between that D and S, representing it's a possessive. Instead, you make it sound like multiple Herod. Yeah. Yeah, they talk about people often struggle with reserve, apathy, or just outright cowardice when it comes to trying to point out punctuation incorrect or punctuation errors. Because I know back in my day it was grammar Nazi. Back off, grammar Nazi. Back then we used to see Nazis as bad things. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people like, Nazis are good. No, you're a moron. Anyway. She calls them punctuation vigilantes. And everyone has always regarded any usage but his own as either barbarous or pedantic, crude or unnecessary. But yeah. Yeah, if you don't know about decimation, it's a Roman action where they would line up the soldiers. Every 10th Roman soldier was killed. And it was a way to say, look, you've not been pulling your weight. And since we're not going to point at any particulars, we're just going to go down the line every 10th. Because it's, of course, it also gives rise to the count of 10. Decibel. Well, I don't think it's the same thing in decibel, but yeah, decimeter. Let's see, what else? You usually don't hear it because it means 1/10. Decigrams, I guess, would be. But yeah, it's used in metric measurements. But yeah, there's different words, prefixes like deca, deca, milla, kilo. Yeah. So it also gives a lot of information to that because it's from the Roman usage where we get those metric measurements. And then she talks about the other cartoon, Illiterate's Entrance. But it's got the S and the N, the apostrophe, which is multiple illiterates entrance. Whereas the other way, it's illiterate apostrophe S, it's just meaning, yeah, that's for illiterates enter. But yeah, that's enough explanation on that. Like I said, next episode we'll be starting the tractable apostrophe. Which apostrophe is the up one. It often shows possessive or contractions. So we'll be doing a lot of talk on the apostrophe. That's a pretty long chapter. And then that brings us into the next one, that'll do, comma, which of course is the lower mark, signifying a pause when you're discussing things. So, yeah, like I said, fun book. I think it does really well. It's kind of hard to go back and have to discuss some of the jokes because I know a lot of people won't always get them, but I enjoy it. It's a comical book. You know, pointing out how silly some things are. But, yeah. Anyway, with that, educate thyself. Think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I'm going to thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.